Ohana Book 2 Birds of a Feather Chapter 3. Maddie woke with a start. Reaching out, she felt Tom at her side, out cold due to all the hard work he had been putting into making sure the town was at peace and their house patched up, and everyone else too. Despite their son saving their home, people still felt the need to air their grievances with the Wachowskis, and they shielded Sonic from the less than pleasant acknowledgments of his involvement in the fight with Robotnik. They had all come to shield him together in that first fight last year, but this one had caused people to look at him with a different light. They were afraid, Maddie knew, and she could remember the hitch in her breath when the foot had been inches from crushing her and her family, the disbelief when her son, her 15-year-old, goofy son, had looked at Robotnik with red eyes filled with so much loathing. She could remember the feeling of his hand in hers, gripping her tight, and Tom's arm around both of them, as though he could shield them from the world. Turning her head, Maddie took note of the time and lifted herself up, running her fingers through her hair. Her feet were devoid of Ozzy, the golden retrievers were missing from the bed, and she pulled the sheets away, feet into her slippers, and stepped out of the bedroom. The house was bright, the sound of Sonic's snores and Tails' low purrs rumbling coming from the attic, and she considered going up to check on them, to make sure her son was still blue and not gold and so angry. A part of her thought, but she knew the attic creaked at the worst times and didn't want to wake them just to satisfy her own mind. She stepped across the hallway to the bathroom, pausing when she saw a light on in the den, and decided to investigate after she took care of business. The sound of soft gloves coming together made her jump as she inched her way to the den, hearing a familiar tone. Who on earth was watching Friends at this hour? Oh, she paused in the doorway, seeing Knuckles lounging on the couch and Ozu next to him to one side, keeping him company. His hand dropped to the dog's head, stretching his ears fondly and calmly, and it was strange to her to see the Echidna so relaxed. He was always on edge, as though he expected something to happen, even though it had been weeks since Robotnik had vanished and the military had helped clean up their town.
The least we could do for the trouble,
Commander Tower had said, negating the fact that he'd only given them an Olive Garden gift card last time.
Would you care to join me, Mother or Fritos?
Maddie blinked olishly, unaware that he'd even known that she was there. Knuckles looked at her from his position on the couch, now seated in a way that made it seem like he was more or less perched there, his hand removed from Ozzy's head even as her dog paid him for more pats, as though he had never been relaxed. It unnerved her a little, but she placed her hands on her hips.
Are you aware of the time, mister? You should be in bed.
Knuckles' purple eyes stared at her, a little weary and alarmed, at the same time that she would speak to him in the same way she would her son. He then huffed, turning his attention back to the screen that was so bright in a dark room.
I am merely keeping watch. We have not seen Robotnik since the battle and an attack.
I don't think we have to worry about an attack.
Maddie's voice dropped its motherly tone, and she came over to the couch to sit on Ozzy's other side so that she didn't crowd him. Ozzy leaned into her and closed his eyes.
What episode are you up to?
I have lost track.
I see you've also been snacking.
She eyed the bag of Cheetos on the coffee table and clicked the roof of her tonga. She recognized this episode. Knuckles huffed again and slutched, his bare foot coming up to rest on the edge of the couch.
I was unaware I had to ask permission to feast.
She tapped his leg and he let it drop, turning to hiss at her. Yep.
You are not my chief, so do not act like it.
He snapped, dreadlocks shifting with his head movement. Maddie shifted back a little and Knuckles calmed down, though she thought she saw tears at the corner of his eyes. She placed her hands back in her lap, then rested one on Ozzy's body as she leaned back in her seat. Knuckles kept looking at her warily, before he eventually returned his attention to the screen when Ross screamed.
Why does Ross simply not eat the other members of his tribe? He is clearly the biggest one.
He mumbled to himself. She blinked at the question, then stifled a laugh behind her hand. It was Knuckles' turn to blink and look at her, frown deepening. Nimble laugh the internet.
That's not a thing on your planet.
She paused, shaking her head and giving him a soft smile.
No, it's not.
There were things that she wouldn't mention around kids, and cannibalism was one of them, even if Knuckles did seem aware of the subject. Maddie watched him, engrossed in the episode as he was, and spoke quietly.
What's really wrong, Knuckles?
Why are you assuming that something is the matter?
Because you were up at 3 in the morning watching runs of Friends. I didn't take you for the type to like television.
Well, there are some rights.
Knuckles returned his attention to the screen once again.
I may dislike the Lord of Donuts and the Hedgehog's taste in entertainment, but I can see why it occupies your human minds.
You didn't have anything like it back home.
No,
Knuckles paused, collecting his thoughts, and shaking his head.
We had no such technology. We did have electricity and means of cooking, but devices like this box and cars were not around. At the very least, not when the tribe.
He paused again, and this time Maddie could swear there was a falter in his voice.
It does not matter.
He quickly reaffirmed.
How about we put a movie instead?
He looked at her before nodding at the suggestion, handing the remote control over. Maddie left Netflix and signed into Disney, wondering to herself which movie to put on before she settled on a classic. Knuckles startled as the introduction music to The Lion King echoed out of the soundbar, his tail flicking behind him in alarm, and then he seemed to calm as the sun rose on screen. 15 minutes into the movie, Maddie turned her head to see if he was enjoying it, opening her mouth to speak before closing it when she saw his expression. Knuckles was tense, his eyes drawn and somber, as Mufasa scolded Simba for disobeying him and then showing concern for his well-being. She watched him watch them playfully chase each other, and she paused the movie, reaching out to gently brush the dreadlock closer to her.
Knuckles, are you okay?
The Echidna exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding in, blinking rapidly to erase the tears in his eyes, and raised a hand to his stomach.
What decide? I am feeling.
Sweetie.
His father told him not to venture there, and yet he did it anyway, and his father came for him. I do not understand why my stomach feels like it is knotted.
Oh dear. Maddie let her hand drop to his shoulder and giving it a gentle squeeze as Ozzy slipped out from between them and sauntered off down the hall now that nobody was paying attention to him. Traitor.
It's okay, Knuckles.
She said, shifting her body so that she could see him and he her. What?
Look at me, breathe. 1, 2, 3. Exhale, 2, 1.
She used her other hand to gesture for him to follow her, and ever so slowly his fingers unclenched from the clutch as he inhaled and exhaled.
What is wrong with me?
You're having a panic attack, sweetie.
Maddie lifted her hand to brush his dreadlocks away, parting her fingers through his head fur, and he flinched at the touch before leaning into it. Mental note, no more Disney movies with a relevant father figure. It was probably a good thing she had paused it there and not during or after the stampede.
It's totally normal.
I do not panic.
Knuckles blinked his eyes, resting his head against her shoulder and allowing himself to be calmed.
I have never panicked, not since.
He swallowed deeply.
It's okay, honey, you can tell me.
He was quiet for a few minutes, his eyes trained on the television and the shadow of Mufasa and Simba in the light of the stars.
What has Sonic told you about me?
He muttered, not liking how he was letting himself be so vulnerable.
Nothing. He said it was up to you to let us know.
I am surprised.
He should have been. Sonic was surprisingly thoughtful when the time came for it.
Are you aware of my tribe's involvement in the demise of Longclaw the Owl?
He felt her shift her head.
Take a while to tell us, but I'm assuming you're the red monsters he mentioned.
Knuckles got twisted and he sighed, leaning himself away from her comfort now that he was feeling a little better. He looked at her and then away, licking his lips as he collected his thoughts.
I am the last of my kind.
He said, placing his hands on his lap and looking ahead at the now shut-off television.
My tribe were massacred by Longclaw and Chunk. She did not go down without a fight, and they knew that. My father forbade me to accompany them into battle. He explained to me the purpose and that they might not return.
Maddie inhaled sharply, not realizing she did so at the same time he did. His fingers itched under his gloves, and he scratched at the top of his knee, unconsciously stimming.
I waited for days, weeks, in the hopes that just one, would return from the battle. They had left me in the care of the sage, my grandfather, and when he was asleep one night I found my way to Longclaw's sanctuary in the trees. I found my father.
He inhaled shakily and a small gasp left his mouth before Maddie's hand found his shoulder again.
I buried them all by myself, including Longclaw. It was the least I could do for such a fierce warrior. Even an enemy as she was my grandfather could not help. He was elderly, and I was young. It was maybe 3 years before he died, and I was alone.
The woman was quiet as he finished his tale, flinching when he felt her hand smooth one of his dreads back again.
I woke from a dream and could not sleep, so I came out here. I hope I did not cause trouble.
Oh, honey.
She wanted to pull him into her arms but knew that he would resist if she did so. There was post-traumatic stress disorder, she could tell, in the way that he spoke about his tribe, similar to the way Sonic spoke of Longclaw in the rare moments that he did. And whatever had gone on with Tails before his arrival he didn't say, but she knew something did. All of her kids were older than they needed to be.
There's no need to be sorry. You had a nightmare. You sought comfort. It's normal. But you don't have to worry about being alone anymore.
He looked at her. That...
You have me and Tom and Sonic and Tails. We might not be a kidness, but we're your tribe now.
Maddie smiled gently.
And if you have nightmares again, you can come jump in with Tom and I.
Knuckles snorted at the notion.
I am hardly a child.
But the tension was gone from his body and he yawned, air coming from his nose as the sunlight started peering on the horizon.
But I do think I will retire to my chambers.
The Echidna paused as he stood, looking at her with a nod.
I thank you, Lady of Donuts, for your kind words.
I keep telling you it's just Maddie.
He licked his lips, unsure, before testing.
Maddie.
She nodded and watched him turn to go down to the basement where they'd set him up, sighing a little as she let herself relax and stand. Heading back to bed herself, Maddie flopped into bed beside Tom, draping herself over his slumbering form and feeling him stir, an eye-opening.
Can't sleep.
He murmured, lifting his hand to card it through her hair.
Just a long talk with a certain echidna.
He pressed his lips to her forehead.
When did we become parents?
When you turn up at my sister's doorstep with an alien hedgehog.
Sunlight was peeking through under the blinds. Soon Sonic would be up for his morning jog. Tails would probably join him, following him around like the little brother he was. Knuckles would sleep well until he rose, rested for the first time in a long time. She did mind motherhood.